nice to be back. I've been to Austin several times, and one of the first times I talked about Nathan Bedford Forrest, it was a long time ago. The book came out originally in 1992. It's been republished by Kansas as the Confederacy's Greatest Cavalryman, so it's got a different title, but it's exactly the same book. I said when I wrote the book, when they were going to republish it with Kansas, I said I'd like to keep my title. A battle from the start is what Forrest said his life had been. And they said, but we would like to republish your book. And I said, you don't understand. I'd like to keep the title. That's what Forrest said. My life has been a battle from the start. And they said, we would like to republish your book. That's when I learned you can write the book, but it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. If the publishers want to do something, the publishers do what they want to do. Now, I wanted to tell you a quick story. I had a job in Kennesaw, Georgia. How many of us have heard of Kennesaw, Georgia? Anybody in the room? Very good. I'm glad some of you have heard of Kennesaw. I've been to as far away as Australia and Great Britain, so I know they've learned about Kennesaw. And I've been everything from Buffalo and New York all the way to California and down to, of course, Arizona and Texas and so forth, and almost all of the round tables in the Southeast. And, of course, they've heard about Kennesaw, too. But my start at Kennesaw State University was kind of colorful because I began in 2010 after teaching for 17 years at the University of Virginia's College at Wise, which was called Clinch Valley College when I first started there. And I'm not going to ask you how many of you heard about that because that's not as easy to do. And I will be the cameraman's best friend because I'll move a little bit. Just hang in there with me. It'll keep you from going to sleep behind the lens. You can't just lock in and then go to sleep. I do that as a trick to the cameraman. They can't do that. Anyway, but when I got to Kennesaw, I was very excited. I got to my office, which was two rooms on the fourth floor of the building. And I looked on the door, and there was a wreath that said, "Rest in peace." Now, I'll tell you, I don't know, mind telling you, I was a little nervous about that because when you come in and the first thing they do is to tell you basically it's already over, that's not a good sign. So I called my advisory board chairperson, and I said, do you know anything about it? He said, let me find out about it, and I'll get back to you. So he went to the phone and picked that up and called, and the florist said, I'm deeply sorry, but we put the wrong wreath on the door. But he says, in case you feel bad about that, imagine that somewhere else in a different spot is a large gathering of people that are looking at well, we all know what they're looking at. And it says on that, in front of that casket, good luck in your new location. So I felt bad about the fact that I got the rest in peace, but I do understand how they feel. But now I've got good luck in a new location again because I retired. And I'll tell you, it's the greatest thing in the world. I love retirement. Get a good job. Hold it for as long as you can do it. I taught for 37 years somewhere. And I was glad to say sayonara. I don't speak much Japanese, but that's pretty much it. And it's also a Marlon Brando movie, but that's another point. I'm a big movie buff, which is why I wrote about Charlton Heston. Everybody wants to know, well, why did you write about Charlton Heston? Now, in case you look at this, that's the Bryce's Crossroads battlefield in the old days. And you say, well, that's Nathan Bedford Forrest, but he's got the wrong date on there. I got so excited when I was trying to do my moving around of different pictures and different things that I picked up, you know how you cut and paste? I cut and pasted something to use, and it still had the other date, and then I didn't fix it. So I haven't gone senile, even though I'm retired. I do know that this is November 13th, and I do know that it's 2014. Isn't that right, Don? I mean, Dan. I did that on purpose. It's really 2025. I get there. Okay, so I'm alive. I get it. I understand. But after that, I think we're all in pretty good shape. But that is Forrest. I think it's a pretty good likeness of him. That's also a very good print. I want to tell you that I have that in my home, so I cannot buy that because I also have the same print that came out of Wiley Sword's collection when he passed away. Does anybody know Wiley Sword? Anybody a Sword fan? And he wrote mostly about Shiloh and about a Johnston that I believe is buried fairly close by, I think. Well, anyway, I've been to that tomb as well. I have not gone on this trip, but I have gone several times to different places in Austin, courtesy of Dan. And today we went to eat, which was good. And yesterday we went to eat, but we also went to the Bullock and to the museum there, and that was a lot of fun. But he's already taken me to the Alamo. Now, I do want to come back and see all the new statues. I know they've done a lot of improvements there. And I've been to San Jacinto. I thought that was great, but we did not tour the battleship. We did do the battlefield, but that's pretty much it. So anyway, so we're going to follow Forrest and look a little bit about the Forrest that you may or may not know much about. If you know a little bit about him, maybe I'll find something that you didn't know or something that reinforces something or challenges something. There's nothing wrong with having your ideas challenged, because every now and then, if you say, well, I thought this, and you find out that there may be another way to look at it, it doesn't mean you're necessarily wrong and that I'm necessarily right, although I will be. But that's, in all seriousness, there are multiple ways of looking at the same subject, and you may have a very good and very reasonable understanding of something, and this is just a different explanation for it. So hopefully you'll learn something today. Okay, that's the home place of Forrest. It's not his birthplace. The birthplace does not exist. The home place is being kept up by the Sons of Confederate Veterans in Middle Tennessee, which is where he was born and raised. He was actually born at Chapel Hill and then moved a slight little distance away and was raised there. And then he ultimately was moved to, he ended up living with an uncle in Mississippi for a while, and a very colorful period of time. But I've got a lot of different images there that are deemed to be sort of reminders for me to tell you some things about his personality, because I do think one of the things I've prided myself for in writing is to try to find out more about what makes these people tick. Because I find that you can do history, and I love Ed Bars. How many of you know Ed Bars? I love Ed. And Ed was a great friend, and we did a lot of forest tours together, he and I did, which, Dan, I know you went on one of them. And some of you also went on. We were talking about 93, well, all the way back to 93 that we did one. The point I'm making is that Ed knew all of these details, and the 5th Alabama moved here, and the 12th Mississippi moved here. I am not that kind of person. That's just not my interest. I'm sure it's important to know whether the 5th Alabama was, and the 9th Mississippi, and the 12th Tennessee, etc., and the Texas anything where it moved. But it's just that I don't do that sort of thing. But I do think I pride myself on getting into a little bit understanding about what maybe we think about these folks, what they thought about things. I used to tell my students that it's important to put yourself back into their time, because it's easy for us to judge, it's easier for us to know, because of course we've been having the long period of later on to examine and look back at things and understand kind of what we think happened. But, when you try to get into their world and their minds, I think that helps you get a better sense of at least maybe why they did what they did. Well, he grew up on a hard scrabble farm. He basically had to learn life the hard way as he grew up. He only had a very minuscule education. He had about 6 months of formal education. He said, I never saw a pin that I didn't think of a snake. So I put the pin and I put a copperhead because I figured that was more likely to be the snake he would probably see. Now, growing up in Eastern Virginia, I would be more likely to see a water moccasin or a cottonmouth, if you've ever heard of that. And growing up on the farm, people would say, look, he's walking along but looking down. And the reason you look down is you never knew when you might stumble on one, and I wanted to see him before he saw me. That was just my way about it. I don't like snakes particularly, and I just wanted to make sure that I didn't run into one. So Forrest said I never saw a pin that I didn't think of a snake, which tells you a little bit of what he thought of pins, because I don't think he cared much for snakes. He also learned how to play cards for money, as they say. I actually went to Mississippi to the courthouse and looked at some of the records in Mississippi, in Coahoma County, Mississippi, and he played cards. You'll notice that these cards are distinctive to the American Civil War. How do we know why? This is test number 1 for you, just to keep you awake. Do you see any numbers? You see numbers on the cards? No, they did not have numbers on the cards, and that is what the Civil War deck would look like. Did not have numbers, but they could count, so they would count. And so when you wanted to know what their hand was, you watch them go 1, 2, 3. See, that's how you knew their hand. So they really probably couldn't do that. But anyway, but he was good at learning how to play poker, and he learned how to read people, how to do tells, and how to understand kind of what somebody might be doing or when they might be bluffing. And this came in very handy to him because the same precepts were very valuable on a battlefield. He loved horses. Now there he is racing horses. He loved, well, not him personally, but he loved to race horses. He loved to ride horses. He understood the value of horses. He understood in the cavalry, well, those horse soldiers, you have to take care of your mount. You have to take care of your horse. That's more important than even taking care of yourself. He also was a great storyteller. There were a lot of times where, frankly, when he sat and told a story, he made it perhaps even better than it really was. I don't want to say that he embellished. That would be a bit Southern of him, wouldn't it? That he told a story and it got better with every telling. He also tended to like to be the center of the story, which is kind of interesting because occasionally he really wasn't the center of the story, but that never stopped. He never slowed down because of that. So do you get a little bit of his personality? You see he was born on July 13th, 1821, so you see his age. By the time of the Civil War, he's actually a little older than some of those people that are swept up in the Civil War because he's been around for a while, since 1821 to 1861. All right, let's look at some other things. Understanding the simple matters of war. And I put a couple of folks here to compare and contrast because we sometimes like to think of Forrest as being outside of the box because he's a natural leader, a natural general. He did not go to military school. He did not go to the Virginia Military Institute. He did not go to West Point. And so sometimes I think it's fun to compare what he says to someone who did go to those places and taught at West Point and is very well known for being one of the great generals of the Civil War. And of course, that's Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. Now, war means fighting, and fighting means killing. He's certainly cutting it right down to the nub. That was of the two people. Who would you guess would say that? Who would you guess? That's a Forrest saying, and you can sort of tell because I put it beside him. Well, that was my hint, if you want to try to get a hint. But notice that you got Stonewall Jackson saying something very similar. War means fighting. The business of the soldier is to fight. Armies are not called to dig trenches. Now, if he had lived a little longer, he would have gotten into the phase of the war where digging trenches was a lot more common. But at the time, before he passed away from friendly fire at Chancellorsville, trenches were not as common as they will be later, at least not in most instances. Sometimes they are. But here he's basically saying that war means fighting and fighting means killing, which is what Forrest said. And I've described Jackson as an Old Testament warrior, and I think that's in a lot of ways. Forrest was kind of that way too, cut from a similar cloth. Do all the possible damage you can in the shortest possible time. Forrest would have been in the back room going, amen. Amen. That's exactly what you should do. So you get a little sense of how he approached warfare once he gets to it. Now, a couple other things. The master of psychology, the skier, putting the skier in him. And that's how he would have spelled it, S-K-E-E-R, skier. And he would have said it that way because most of what he does is phonetic. So if he says fight, it's F-I-T-E. Why would you need the extra things like a G? What the heck do you need a G in there for? Fight, F-I-T-E. So he's probably saying it, fight. We're going to fight, you know? All right. Whenever you see anything blue, shoot at it and do all you can to keep up the scare, or the skier, as he would put it. That's a Forrest saying. Now let's see how that might compare to something. Once you get them running, you stay right on them, and that way a small force can defeat a large one every time. That's actually the same guy we've talked about again. Well, wait a minute before we get to that picture to clarify it. Here he's saying the only true rule for cavalry is to follow the enemy as long as he retreats. Well, isn't that essentially what Forrest had said? And that person is Stonewall Jackson. So I just think it's interesting when the people that are real Jackson fans hear that Forrest says essentially the same thing. They're like they're cut from the same cloth. They're very different personalities. They're different people. And in polite company, Forrest would not be appreciated the way Stonewall Jackson is, But even Stonewall Jackson would have been uncomfortable in polite company. He was just not that kind of guy. If you've read Bud Robertson's book, you know that Jackson was not the easiest person to get along with or to spend social time with. He was kind of again, cut from the old school cloth, a soldier who came from kind of the Old Testament. All right, secrets to success. And this is kind of Forrest: boldness and intimidation. He learned it from an early age. We can talk about that later if you want to think about examples that are from his pre-war experiences that will inform his wartime experiences, that will tell us something about why he acted and behaved the way he did. If you want to do that, I've got a great book. I've got 2 copies of it. Don't make me fly back with those. I want to let you have them. But whenever you meet the enemy, no matter how few there are of you or how many of them, show F-I-T-E, fight. Show fight. Now that's Forrest. Now here's what, so whoops, I'm about to get away too fast. I think I've got it in there. If I don't, I'll tell you. Well, maybe I've got to tell you. I may have them in a different spot, but Stonewall will say basically the same thing. He will say, mystify the enemy. Now, mystify would have been a kind of hard word for Forrest, and yet Forrest taught himself how to read. By the time of the war, he understood basic English. Now, his problem is when he wrote, he still wrote the way he spoke. It was phonetic. And we'll talk about that later because it really comes in handy. But again, Stonewall's going to say some of the same things that you would expect from Forrest and say them in a little bit fancier way, more classical way, or more less phonetic way. All right. Secrets to success: intelligence. Now, I'm sure everybody in the room knows what I mean by intelligence. I don't mean smarts. I mean knowing, knowledge, information, getting something so that you'll know what you're dealing with. Civil War is a very difficult war because there are a lot of times that both sides, the people on both sides, simply have no idea what the other side is doing, where they are, or what they're engaged in. So you will hear occasionally comments like, develop the enemy line, feel for the enemy. Now, when you're feeling for the enemy, that does not suggest you're comfortable knowing where they are. And frankly, sometimes the way you found out was you sent a force, and depending on how much resistance they met, that's how much strength the enemy force had. And so that could get a lot of people killed for you just trying to figure out where they were. And Forrest was trying to figure out where they were too, so he would try to figure that out. The more intelligence or information he could gather, the better things would be for any general, and Forrest was no exception to that. He was the same kind of way. Now, I haven't yet kind of said a little bit about how he even got into the war. Forrest will go into the war as a private. Think about going in as a private. He's just going to be an ordinary citizen. By the time he's very shortly in the military, he's already a lieutenant colonel. And part of that was because he could raise troops, he could inspire troops, and that was a good thing if you wanted to try to raise a command that you could then be in charge of. And his son goes into the war with him. His son is very young, he's just a teenager, and he will fight with Forrest for a period of time. Then Forrest doles him out. We'll talk about that a little bit later, to other roles, in part because he wants him to be in better company. He wants him to be a better person than Forrest is himself. So he's very aware of his shortcomings. He's very aware of how he can be in better circles. He can be in better circles. All right, here's one of my favorites, though. In one of the raids, Forrest has a young person, probably about the same age as his son, about 15 or 16 years old, maybe just a tad older. And that kid goes out to try to scout out information to bring back to Forrest. Now, if you went out to get information for Forrest and you came back and you said, I heard thus and such, Forrest would drag you off the horse, break off a tree branch, and beat you. Because he doesn't want you, as he put it, to come here with a pack of damned lies. That was Nathan Bedford Forrest. To him, hearsay was damned lies. And so he would tell people that, and he would do that, and he was not known to be gentle with those people that did not take their duties seriously. But here was a young fellow who went off, and he got everything Forrest wanted. He figured out the road network, he figured the creek crossings, he figured where could you ford, he figured everything out. He even figured out where the enemy positions were and why that was so important. As Forrest says, it was just as important to know where they ain't as to where they are. Why would you want to know where they ain't? If you're raiding, you want to be able to get around forces, especially if they turn out to be in larger numbers. So knowing where they ain't gives you a chance to go in those places. You take your cavalry force where they ain't. Now, sometimes he wanted to go where they are. But if that kid would come back and say, you have a very small garrison here, then Forrest might go attack that garrison because he could gobble it up. He liked to be more certain of success, as much as possible, more certain of success. Now, this is where Dan and I part company with the story that he told. I have said nothing about what Georgia is going to do to Texas because I have no clue what Georgia is going to do to Texas. I don't even think Georgia knows what they're going to do to Texas. So I'm not going to predict anything that I can't say with some certainty. That is very Forrest-like. He wanted to be sure before he ran off at the mouth or said something that he might regret. He did not want to be found to be less than knowledgeable of the circumstance. And in this case, he makes a tremendously successful raid around Nashville and captures some of the garrisons in outlying areas where they're more susceptible to being cut off. So Forrest is very aware of information and how to use it, and it's important sometimes to know where the enemy ain't so you can take advantage of the gaps and the places where you can slip through if possible. All right, secrets to success. If you show fight, they will think there are more of you, and they will not push you so hard. They will not make it so difficult for you. Now that's the Forrest saying. I even got it up there by Jackson, but that's not a Jackson saying. That's a Forrest saying, and I think that's impressive. Now, how many of you plan to make a movie in the future? I didn't think so. But if you do, and you only have as many people as we have or less in this room, and you want to make it about a Civil War battle, and you line those people up shoulder to shoulder the way the Civil War soldiers do, what's the worst thing you can do with the camera? Take it so that you can see that there's only 38 people in the picture. Okay. On the other hand, if I stretch you shoulder to shoulder and spread you out and show only to the end of the person here and the end of the person here, but not beyond, the imagination of the person viewing it will spread the line for you. You will have the viewer make it appear to themselves that you have more people than you do. Forrest loved doing stuff like that. If they don't know how many there are of you, you are doing the best when you can make it, that uncertainty, a matter of we'll just make it painful reality to an enemy. Because if they elevate or make your numbers even greater than they are, you're going to have a success. You've already got them intimidated in their heads. Now, Dan asked me, did I play football? Marilyn asked me, did I play football? I have a football body. I did have a professor that said I was the worst excuse for a beer drinking body, waste of a beer drinking body, because I don't drink beer. And he said, you know, you're a waste of a beer drinking body. I won't tell you what I drink because I don't want you to go tell it on the news, and then I got to explain that back home to my wife, who actually knows pretty well what I drink, but that's neither here nor there. Point I'm trying to make about it is that when you are talking about you playing on somebody's mind, the psychological element of it, that was where Forrest was a master. And he used the same kind of ideas that he would have used at a poker table. Bluff and bluster, he would use the fact that he can make you think that that he's got more than he does. And sometimes he probably does, but sometimes he probably doesn't, but you don't know. And he plays on that. He was a master of that. He will say, he's only got 6 months of formal education, so he's not going to have the textbooks to read a whole lot, and he wouldn't spend a whole lot of time wasting his time trying to read textbooks. But he says, I will often have need of this maneuver because somebody will inevitably come up to him and say, well, General, have you thought about this? Have you thought about trying this? And he said, well, let's see how it works. And so usually he'll get them to demonstrate it. And in this case, he's actually trying to get them to demonstrate how they can use a bugle to make people move in certain ways. And And in this case, particularly, what he wanted to try to do was to get a circle. If he could get his men to go in a circle, and he will say, I might have need of this maneuver. I might have need of this thing that I have learned, that I have seen, and I might be able to make something in the future happen by taking this information and applying it and using it. It will be necessary from time to time, for me to show more men in the field than I actually have. And guess what? There's going to be a major battle at Straits Raid will end with Forrest having only a fraction of the number of Union troops he encounters, and he's going to use a maneuver where he brings it, or appears to bring in reinforcement, appears to bring in more people than he actually has, including artillery pieces. He only has 2 artillery pieces at the end of Strait's raid, but by the time he goes to tell Strait to surrender, Strait says, name of God, man, how many guns have you got? That's 16 I've counted. Now, how did he pull that off? He'd bring 2 cannon into view. He would say, guys, this is a truce. I'm negotiating. Drop back. You can't come out here. They would go back and change horses. He had extra horses around and extra harness, etc., so he could easily change horses, and 2 more would trot out. It's the same 2. And then 2 more, same 2. And then 2 more, same 2. And at the same time, our friend Abel Strait is saying, my God, how many guns have you got? That's 16 I've counted. And he says, I've got enough to do with you. Okay. All right, so that's Forrest. Let's see what Jackson say. This is where the mystify quote comes from. Always mystify, mislead, and surprise the enemy if possible. And when you strike a blow, overcome him and never let it up. Never let up a pursuit. Same things keep the scare in them. I could have used that quote back over in that part. If you have followed them, if you have an army routed and hotly pursued, it becomes panic-stricken, and you can then destroy them. They can be destroyed by half their number. I mean, the same basic idea that Forrest presented in his less educated but practical approach to warfare. That's probably as easy a way to understand Forrest as anything. What made sense? Common sense is how he acted on the battlefield. All right, here's where he captures Strait, and there's where it talks about name of God, how many guns have you got? And he beats Strait and gets Strait eventually sent to Libby Prison. Now, Libby Prison is no picnic, no great place to be. And then you know what Abel Strait did? He tunneled out and escaped. So by the time you sit around and think, well, who did Forrest beat? And he didn't really play the A teams. He didn't really do that much. He played some tough figures, and Strait was a pretty tough figure. Certainly not a simple person. Now, when he went to negotiate with Strait, he didn't let Strait see his hand. Remember, if you're going to bluff, you can't expose your hand too soon. He had couriers come up. I'm from the 5th Mississippi. The 5th Mississippi was nowhere near. But Strait didn't know. Here's a courier coming up and claiming. Finally, Forrest got mad, and that was another advantage he always had, was that temper. He could use that temper any way he wanted. Sometimes he controlled it, sometimes he couldn't control it, but he always could use it. And what he said was, move the men to the rear. I've got too many men at the front. I don't need them. They're in the way. So imagine if you're the Union force and you actually have Forrest 3-1, and you don't know it, and you think he's bringing in even more people, you think you're in trouble. Now, Strait wanted to fight, but his officers all said, I think we better surrender. We better call it a day. And Strait finally, reluctantly, surrendered his force. But it's funny that he was still wanted to fight, and he was willing to fight. And when he started seeing Forrest's real numbers come out, he started counting and seeing that he had a lot less men than he thought, that Forrest had a lot less men than Strait thought. He said, I want to have my guns back. And Forrest said, no, I don't think so. I don't think we're going to do that. And supposedly, one of the nicer explanations of what he said to Strait was, Colonel, all is fair in love and war, you know. Now, as Ed Bars would tell you, and probably Forrest would tell you, he's also supposed to have said, dry those tears or you'll dry them in hell. Because he started getting so upset, the moisture was literally coming out of his eyes. You say, wait a minute, that can't happen. Well, supposedly, one of the comments that one of the big four said at the end of World War I was, we're going to squeeze the Germans until the pips squeak. You know, when you can push the seed and make that little bit of air come out. And I think that's how Strait felt. He was feeling so upset, so emotional. He don't think he wanted to show any expression of upset, but he couldn't help himself. I think he was pretty worked up. And Forrest basically told him to calm down. It's over. You're done. And he went off to Libby prison. Oh, by the way, he was sent off to Rome, Georgia, and people did not know that that was a captured force coming in their direction. They thought it was Yankee raiders, and they took out a couple of old cannon and started to fire at them. Fortunately, the old cannon did not function right, and Forrest was not accidentally killed by his own joyous citizen, because as soon as they found out it was Forrest and he captured Strait, the biggest number of people in the uniforms were blue, prisoners. And as soon as they saw that they were prisoners, they all had a big celebration. They gave Forrest a horse, who he cherished for the rest of the war as much as he could. Forrest was not good on horses. If you've studied Forrest, you know that Forrest had 29 horses shot out from under him, killed, including one that he rode through the battle with his finger in the bullet hole until the battle was over. He pulled his hand out, finger out, and the horse dropped dead. So imagine that. Forrest is going to, by the time of the end of the Civil War, be a lieutenant general. Went in as a private, comes out as a lieutenant general. That's the next to the full general that you can be. You're as close to the top as you can be. As a lieutenant general, he was still doing it, but he claimed that by the time the war was over, he had personally killed 30 enemy soldiers. He liked to say that he was one up on the Yankees. They killed 29 of his horses. He killed 30 of them. That's what he liked to say. Forrest is kind of hard on Yankees. If you look at the cover of my reprinted book, it's one of the prints. It's a beautiful print that shows Forrest about to dispatch a Yankee, and you look at the Yankee's eyes, and they're big like saucers, where he knows he's in trouble. As Forrest is upset, I'll tell you about that later if I think about it. All right, vision and focus, keeping his eyes on the prize. Forrest did this from the very beginning of the war. He will receive a significant promotion after he captures a Union force at Murfreesboro, and he actually attacks on his birthday, so it's a nice birthday present for him. But he found there are 3 locations where the Federals have troops in Murfreesboro, and he's got to figure out, how do I attack 3 different locations? And he understood, I better hit them all at the same time so they can't help each other. They can't rally. And he was real smart about getting them pinned down and everything else, but letting them know that there was no hope for them to escape alive. You know, that was Forrest's mantra. You could imagine him wandering around. They claimed that during the battles, his features would bow up, that he would actually almost seem to get larger and turn red like an Indian. And you can imagine how terroristically that must come across to the people that are fighting against him. Well, at one point, they have a part of the force pinned down where Forrest is himself fighting, and that force surrenders to him. So he's accomplished a part of what he has wanted to accomplish by attacking this isolated Union garrison. He's gotten one of 3 parts to surrender. And his subordinates start coming up to him and they say, General, we need to call it a day. We need to quit. We need to go while the going is good, while we're ahead. Now, remember, he played poker, so he understood poker games where you got a nice pot, but there are bigger pots maybe if you keep playing. So he wants to keep playing, and look how he says it. I didn't come here to make half a job of it. I mean to have them all. And his staffers are all saying, but General, the Yankees are alerted to us being here, and they will start sending for reinforcements, and they will start coming in larger numbers, and we may be the ones who are trapped and forced to surrender. And Forrest didn't care. That wasn't what Forrest wanted to hear. He wanted to hear, how are we going to get them? And what he did, this will tell you again how bluff worked for Forrest. He will let one of the Yankee officers come out where they can see, and he'll start parading his troops. He keeps bringing them around and putting them in new positions and new conditions, so they come out again and again and again. Tend to appear to be thousands of troops when there's only a relatively small number. And what happens, of course, is the officer goes back to his men. I think it was a colonel, goes back to his men and says, boys, we really are in trouble. We're going to have to surrender. Well, once he gets them to surrender, then the last little tidbit can be cleaned up because he can consolidate against them. And in each case, he's finished the job until it's over. It's complete. He means to have them all. And at Murfreesboro, he will show that spirit as much as he does anything else. All right, sometimes you have a battle that does not go well. And the Battle of Parker's Crossroads, how many of you have been to Parker's Crossroads? It's a great place to go. If you've ever been, I would highly recommend you go again, because chances are you went some time ago. And if you went some time ago, you've missed a lot of the improvements. The American Battlefield Trust, which was renamed from something else, but the point I'm making is that Battlefield Trust has done a great job of interpreting pretty much the whole battle. The battle itself is probably as well interpreted as any battlefield in the South. It's a really well done thing where you've got lots of signs, lots of ways to understand how this battle unfolds. Now, I'm going to make this quick and simple because I don't want to be here all night. I don't want you to be here all night and say, oh, I will never have him come back again. He won't shut up. He won't shut up. So what happens at Parker's Crossroads, Forrest has made a tremendous raid through West Tennessee, and he's on his way back to his own lines with a Union force in front and one coming in from behind. Now, in the American West, we will have a number of Indian campaigns where converging columns are what the cavalry tries to accomplish, letting the Native Americans get in a spot, and you're going to bring columns from different directions to trap them so they can't get away. The same idea here. Forrest is now the prey, and these Yankees are the pursuers trying to capture him and defeat him. Forrest has figured out that that's what they're going to try to do, and he sends his brother to look at one of the roads to make sure they can't come from that direction and surprise him. Now, his brother was apparently a rough character. Forrest will later say that his brother is the only man he was ever afraid of. Can you imagine what a bad guy that must have been that Forrest was afraid of? But unfortunately, Bill Forrest will get on the wrong road. And the Yankees will come in from the rear, and nobody will know it until it's too late. Now, you know how they know it when it's too late? You have horses. Forrest liked to put the men on the ground. And you usually had every fourth man hold the horses while the other three went forward. They're called horse holders. Not very creative, but that's what they're called. So these horse holders would be in a safe rear area. If you'll notice, there's a little kind of area in the back part of that picture. It represents where an orchard was. That's where these horse holders were, in an orchard. Well, all of a sudden, these horse holders start coming racing by. And they didn't look like they were very happy. And the horses were panicked. And Forrest said, this is not good. This is not good. So he went to check on what had happened, and he found out that the Yankees had stampeded his horses. Now, when you're cavalry, horses come in handy. Not only to get somewhere, but to go somewhere, to get out of somewhere. So keep that in mind. If you want to get away, it's nice to be able to have your horse free and get to it and get on it and ride off. Well, Forrest has found that that's going to be problematic. Problematic. I don't know if he knew that word. But that's the way it is, okay? So Forrest is trying to figure out what to do. Two Yankees come out and say, you should surrender or we will shoot. Well, now he's in real trouble because now these two Yankees have got guns pointed at him and they're going to shoot at him. And so he looks at them and he says, tell you what, boys, if you will wait right here, I will go get the rest of my men and we'll all surrender to you. And those two Yankees looked at each other. Don't want to say anything bad about Yankees. They're fine people. They're just born in the wrong place. They can't help it. Brother Dave Gardner would know that. There were people born in the northern side. So anyway, so those two Yankees looked at each other, and they started thinking, we're private. We could be corporals. We're going to capture the whole bunch. You think Forrest came back? No. He was not telling the truth in that circumstance. He rode off and went to rally his men. Now remember, you got a Yankee force in front. What happened to them? they were about to surrender themselves. So he had them beat down pretty good. It's actually an amazing story, the Battle of Parker's Crossroads. He's about to defeat that force in front of him and dispatch them, and then he can move on towards the river where he can cross at a little town called Clifton, Tennessee. So here's Forrest now having to deal with a development he had not planned for and a circumstance that he did not want. We call that adversity. Adversity. That's what we call it. He called it, oh, hell. That's what he would call it, because that's the kind of guy he was. He was just that way. Don't ever feel like I'm saying these words myself. This is Forrest. All right, so Forrest would be a little bit concerned. He's gone to rally his men, and he sees a young man, and he doesn't have a gun. And he says, well, jump in line and yell. If you make a big noise, that will help, because the enemy does not know how many there are of us. And he was going to use this young man with no gun who could at least yell and scream, and maybe in all that noise, again, the Yankees would see that the numbers were greater than they could handle, and if nothing else, at least pause. Isn't that kind of all he wanted, was them to pause and let him have more time? And he will escape in between those two forces and ride out to live to fight another day. He did not consider this to be a defeat. And at one point, he is supposed to have stood up in his stirrups. Now, that's hard to do. If you have horses, you know how hard that is to do. And said, men, we're going to charge them both ways. And that's what he's famous for saying. I don't know that he did that, but he knew enough to kind of make a blow in this direction, make another blow in this direction, make them stop, make them pause, and he slipped out. Remember, to that young boy, he said, I want to make as big a show as possible. That's why he said, you can yell, can't you? And he ended up escaping. He never said this was a defeat. To him, the fact that he was able to escape was good enough. Now, he did lose people. Some people were captured. He lost some equipment, some horses, etc. So it was not a good day at the office for Forrest, but he was not inclined to paint it as a defeat because he had slipped away. All right, here we are. Forrest is supposed to say that his secret to success was getting there firstest with the mostest. That's why you said it this the way you said is my introductionists. Okay? But he didn't probably really say that. That's too many syllables. He cut things down rather than spread things out. But when he was sitting with some officers after Chickamauga, and they were saying, well, what are your secrets to success? How did you achieve success? He said, well, my idea, he said, I don't know about y'all. I don't know how y'all think about it. But my idea is to get there the most men first, if you can. But I always think this is even better because this is classic Parker's Crossroads. He must have been thinking about it in his mind. And if you can't whoop them, you can outrun them. And so, again, it doesn't sound great. It doesn't fit into a book where you would write about the successes or defeats of Napoleon or Hannibal or anybody else. But it made sense. You try to whoop them, but if you can't, you try to live to fight another day. That was one of Forrest's successes. All right, here's Forrest leaning up against the tree, watching things go by. And I won't make you try to remember all of this or to read all of this, but essentially he's constantly seeing things that he interprets one way. And he finds out that what he thought wasn't necessarily true, and most of the time he gets a lesson out of it. He gets something that he can use to fight another day. And so he's always curious as to why do these artillery pieces, these light artillery pieces, and he had little mountain howitzers as often as anything else, why do they come up and then take the artillery, the limber chest away? Why do they take the horses and the limber chest away? Well, if you're in the artillery, you know that the one thing you don't want is to have all those horses shot, because you then have to push things by hand and you don't get very far. So they move horses to the rear. The limber chests have the ammunition. But see, the Forrest, the limber chest going in the opposite direction away from the enemy is not good. And he interprets that you're cowardly, you're chicken, you're running away. And he says, I know one thing, I know how to fight, and you can't fight by running away with the ammunition in the opposite direction. And somebody said, no, wait a minute, General, wait a minute. This is how it's done, and this is why it's done this. Okay, I get it. You know, one time he's watching an artillery piece being moved along a muddy road, and it gets stuck. And he notices that there are men struggling to get it unstuck. But he's far enough away that he doesn't see they've actually unloaded the limber chest. Does everybody understand? A limber chest is on a small cart pulled by its own horse team, and you got the cannon behind the limber chest. Okay, so you've got, and caissons, by the way, have 2 artillery chests plus their own limber. So you, on a Napoleon, for instance, you'd have 4 ammunition chests available to you. Okay, but Forrest is going to see this thing stuck, and he's going to go down and he wants to choose somebody out, because surely to God, if you try harder, you could get it done. And he's going to give you motivation. He's going to come down swearing and cussing, because that's what he does. And he's going to come down and he's going to have an officer looking at him who is not going to be happy to be cussed out, probably a sergeant who doesn't like to be cussed out. And it's late in the day, and they've been working to try to move this through all this mud, and they've got torches to try to light the path. And he sees the torch, and he sees this sergeant and this non-com, and he says, I want you guys to get this damn thing out of the mud. And he says, I will not be cussed. And the guy takes this torch and sticks it in the limber chest. Now, in Forrest's mind, he is about to blow everybody up. And Forrest will be on his horse. He'll turn the horse around. That crazy bastard's going to blow us all to hell. Except they'd already unloaded the limber chest to try to get the weight off so they could carry it, get it out of the mud. He didn't know that. When he gets out of range, he notices nobody else is running and nothing's exploding. He starts putting 2 and 2 together. He also sees people stifling laughter. I don't think you tended to laugh out loud at Forrest. That probably wouldn't work too well. So they're stifling laughter, and he finally comes back. What's going on? He finds out they've unloaded the limber chest, and he looks at the fellow and he says, I will never cuss you again. He said, I will never cuss you again, because he liked the cut of his jib, as they used to say. You ever heard that term, the cut of his jib? He liked that. All right. Commander recalled a few days after I took my book of tactics to the general's tent, because you've got officers, staff officers who are trying to help him. He's still not going to spend his time reading it, but you could take it, open it up, point it out, and say, this is what this is saying. And he didn't have to read. He could put 2 and 2 together. He was not stupid. The more people thought he was stupid, the more they played into his hands. Because if they thought he was stupid, he could take advantage of their misinformation about his personality and character. Okay? But what he will do is get an explanation, and finally he understands, and he will then look at the book in a different way, usually illustrated, and he'll take that and learn from it for future reference. All right. Summer of 1864, the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads is Forrest's greatest battle. And he will have an amazing circumstance by the way he handles this battle. And I thought I'd focus mostly on that before I finish off with a few other minor things. He has to figure out where the Federals are coming out of Memphis from, to rather. And he's seeing that they could go in multiple directions, and he doesn't know. So he spreads his troops out. And I think that was what he always did that was pretty smart, because he's going to try to cover every eventuality. And once he sees that a force has committed itself to a specific set of roads or specific advance, then he can concentrate. And that was just a natural, instinctive understanding he had of a battlefield. I'm going to figure out where the enemy's going, and then I'll go and concentrate against them. And he's got these troops spread out in a variety of ways on different locations, depending on where the enemy might go. And as soon as he knows, then he can start bringing them together. The Federals are coming out of Memphis. They're coming under Sam Sturgis and Ben Grierson. I told you I like the movies. Ben Grierson had a great raid in Mississippi that went from North Mississippi all the way to Baton Rouge. And who was in charge of that? John Wayne. It's called the Horse Soldiers. The Horse Soldiers. And that's the same Ben Grierson's going to be at this battle. So you're dealing with one of the better Union cavalry commanders, an excellent raider in his own right. And Forrest is going to confront Grierson with the cavalry first and the infantry coming behind it. It's important to kind of get that deployment in mind so you understand what's coming. And you see the numbers, about 6,000 Union infantry. And remember, go back and look at the Confederates. They only have a fraction of that. Okay, and again, they're cavalry, not infantry. He's got cavalry too. He's got horses. He's got wagons. He's got artillery. This is a pretty formidable combined force coming out of Memphis to take on Nathan Bedford Forrest. And Sam Sturgis will stop along the way and say that he hopes that Forrest will be a man and stand and fight and not run away. Well, I don't think he's going to have to worry about that. I don't think he's going to have to worry at all about that. Forrest is waiting to fight him, but fight him in a way that's more favorable to Forrest, not so favorable to the larger number of federal troops under Sam Sturgis and Ben Grierson. And this is what Forrest starts to think about. He'll actually tell a subordinate commander. He says the Federals have brought their cavalry up first. They'll then bring their infantry along. The cavalry will come to the crossroads where I plan to fight them, and as soon as we engage, they will send for the infantry to come up. Now, on this particular period of time, there'd been a lot of rain, and they're coming through a very swampy area from one plantation where they've camped to where they're going to fight the battle, and it's not going to be circumstances that are favorable, especially once it stopped raining and the sun hits all that rain and turns it into humidity. Humidity is one of the Confederate secret weapons. Mud is another one, but humidity. And he says they will come in and the country's rough, and they will go and double quick to hurry along and try to get here in time. And by the time they get here, they'll be worn out, and we can beat them then, just as we've beaten the cavalry. Because his idea was we can take on the cavalry, and we can beat that, and then we'll take on the infantry. We'll finish them off. And it's more or less how the battle unfolded. Now, again, Forrest is not an ancient historian, somebody who studies ancient history, but he does know what he wants to say, and he knows how he wants to put things. He knows how he wants things done. He will talk about his staff as them clerks. Now, I'm sure that that's not what the staff like to hear themselves referred to as just clerks, them clerks, but I'm sure they understood what he meant by that. And remember, he said he never saw a pen that he didn't think of a snake. So he hasn't exactly been comfortable with writing orders, but they will say, for instance, things in a nice way, positive way, taking his rough language and making it sound much better. But this is what Forrest actually tells them to write. Tell Bell, a little note, tell Bell to move up fast and fetch all he's got. Now think about it. Why does he want Bell to get there so fast? Because look at the numbers. Who's got the most troops that can come there and help out? Bell. So he wants his largest troop formation to get there as fast as possible. Them clerks love to clean it up, and they will say, the general insists that you bring up the cavalry. Forrest will say, no, we're not going to say it that way. He's going to say, I want to use the word fetch. Because if you use bring up or something else, they'll think about it. And I don't want them to think about it. I want them to do it. Fetch means now. Just like you throw a stick and you want the dog to bring it back now. Not when the dog feels like it. You want it now. So again, he's going to supposedly say, get there firstest with the mostest. And at Bryce's Crossroads, he's not the first at the crossroads. The Yankees actually get there first. He's not got the most, and yet this is his biggest battle, and the one that he claims that this secret is the way he won the battle. But in so many ways, Forrest has that sort of after the fact sort of description of something that doesn't necessarily pan out the way it really was. Ultimately, he does get all those troops together. Ultimately, they do come in time, and ultimately they get the job done. But this is partly why. Here's fetch, and this is why. He uses the artillery in an unconventional way. He's not a conventional soldier. Unconventional means it's going to be different. He knows that a lot of these people will study tactics and they will expect certain behaviors. He's not going to do what you expect. He's going to do the unexpected. And what he's going to do is push the artillery right to the front. You're not supposed to do that. And Morton, his young artillerist, is going to say, that's going to mean my cannon can be captured. And Forrest will say, artillery is made to be captured, and I want them to see them take yours. I want to see them take yours, because he knew that that wouldn't happen. Go right on them and double up your canister. Give them as much firepower as you can and hit them hard, because that's what he expected his generals, his subordinates, his colonels, his sergeants, his captains, his majors, his lieutenants to do. is to follow him to the front and fight ferociously. War means fighting, and fighting means killing, even if the artillery pieces come to the very front where they might be captured. As it is, that intensive firepower helps break the Union forces and turn them into panic-stricken runners. They're going to abandon the battlefield. It's going to be kind of like Bull Run or First Manassas or Second Manassas. All right. Here's how he ultimately breaks the line. If you go there today, you'll see this particular marker on the battlefield. As Ed Bars would say, the classic double envelopment. And what that simply means is you're going to come around on either flank. But he didn't say flank. He said end. Hit them on the end. And he sends this body of troops to go threaten this Union end or flank. And he sends this body of troops to hit this end or flank. And again, that pressure from the front and both sides is usually more than forces can matter. If you can get in the rear, that's even better. If you can get in the rear. In this case, the flanks is enough. This is the Battle of Cannae. Cannae is one of the great master battles of the ancient world. Forrest didn't know that, but he knew the principle. He knew the idea. He knew what the same thing that Hannibal understood in his time. All right. When it works with a master stroke. The Federals break and run, and they are forced from the battlefield, and Forrest is capturing men, artillery, wagons, all the rest, and it's a running fight as the Federals race to get back to Memphis much quicker than they marched out. Much quicker. Okay? At one point, Forrest is so exhausted from the fighting and the heat that he actually collapses from the saddle. One of his subordinates continues the fight is a big old 300-pounder by the name of Abraham Buford. I always thought that was wonderful, being a not small person myself, that one of Forrest's subordinates, the big guy, sticks with it even after Forrest has collapsed and becomes one more of the final nails in the Federal coffin at this battle. So the Federals lose 16 artillery pieces of cannon, 176 wagons, ambulances, small arms, ammunition, all of that in Forrest's hands, and in a coup that is amazing for the Civil War. This is as close you come to a complete victory as you can do. All right, I won't go into all of this, but Fortress Rosecrans around Stones River and Murfreesboro was a huge, massive supply depot. Supplies are critical in the war. You've got to have the means to get guns and ammunition and food and clothing to the armies in the field, or they're going to have a hard time fighting. They'll have a hard time maintaining their operations. At this point, Hood has retreated out of Georgia after he's lost Atlanta, and he's on his way up into Tennessee. He's fought the Battle of Spring Hill. That's what that picture is, Spring Hill, with Pat Claiborne, one of my other favorite Confederates. And they've then pursued and fought the terrible and bloody Battle of Franklin. And then finally the siege of Nashville, which George Henry Thomas will break the siege and drive the Confederates back. John Bell Hood's campaign will collapse. Well, one of the reasons that Forrest is actually not at Nashville is he's been sent down to see what he can do about maybe capturing this massive supply depot that the Federals have built in Murfreesboro. And he comes in and finds out that the complex is enormous. He doesn't have nearly enough men to do. He does have a little infantry with him, so it is a mixed force. He's going to do the best he can, and one of the ways he's going to do it is he's going to attack over here and attack over here, making the enemy think that he's actually more than he is, and that they keep them off their stance, off their footing, and end up perhaps forcing an opening that he can take advantage of. And he'll tell the infantry that's supposed to make one of those attacks, you attack here, hold the enemy's attention, I will bring my cavalry over here, and we will capture the whole bunch, the whole lot. And so he says, buy me some time, basically. All I ask is 15 minutes. Now, frankly, you could have had 15 minutes, an hour, or 12 hours. It wasn't going to work. Murfreesboro is too big a nut to crack for Forrest and the force he had. He's hoping bluff and bluster will do what numbers can't possibly do. and he is not going to fare well. He will not do well in this fight. In fact, his forces the infantry will break in panic. The cavalry won't be able to do enough. They will then be driven off. It's another defeat, but again, Forrest never said that he was defeated, but one time, and that was much later in the war. But he's trying to do what he can, and again, he's tasked with doing this very odd thing, which is to capture a major supply depot. But imagine what Hood needs more than anything else: supplies. And why not get them from the Union? Why not get the Federals to give them to you if you can capture them? And nobody liked that better than Forrest. He loved that. But unfortunately, by the time he is going to be set back at Murfreesboro, the collapse has happened at Nashville, and now he's racing over to join the retreat. And he then becomes a leapfrog force trying to cover the retreat of Hood's remnants as they go back and try to get across the Tennessee River. So this isn't going to work out the way he wants, but he does at least have the idea in mind of what he wants to accomplish. So not always did Forrest have that great triumphant victory that he has had in some other locations, and sometimes his even most creative ways of dealing with a dire situation don't work out. All right, getting the bulge against them. This was kind of his phrase. I want to get the bulge on the enemy, push them. I want to do that. He will tell James Harrison Wilson after the fall of Selma, Alabama in 1865, when James Harrison Wilson does to Forrest what Forrest had done to Wilson. In Spring Hill and other places in that campaign, it's right over there in that beautiful portrait, that was a place where the Union cavalry under Wilson's driven completely off the battlefields. They are so outmatched that they pull completely out of the way altogether. And in some ways, Wilson's embarrassed. And Forrest has embarrassed him. When the shoe is on the other foot, when the other situation's different. And now Wilson has a juggernaut to come against Selma, Alabama. And Forrest, remember, divides those troops up and concentrates them. Wilson won't let him concentrate them. He gets some of the Forrest troops on one side of a river, some of them on the other side of the river. He won't let them combine. He uses Forrest against himself and ends up striking Forrest as he tries to defend Selma, and the troops are forced to collapse. It's one of the last places that Forrest kills an enemy officer again that's coming to attack him personally. But Forrest lives to fight another day and escapes. And even though they lose, they are driven from the defenses of Selma and whatnot, he actually ends up meeting with Wilson to talk about sort of the aftermath and where do we go from here. You know, sometimes you can exchange prisoners or whatever. And Forrest is always looking for information. Go talk to the other guy. See what he'll tell you. What can you learn? Because Forrest thought, if I can meet with the guy, I can get some stuff out of him he may not even know I'm getting from him. And he will tell him, I ain't no graduate of West Point, and I never rubbed my back again no college. But he says, I think I know a lot about battle and war, and you're about the only one general that's ever beaten me from first to last. Well, I've already given you two examples where he lost. But to him, he didn't really lose. He was living to fight another day. This one was as close to where he didn't get to fight another day, at least not much longer, because he's going to ultimately be forced into Alabama, a corner of Alabama where he will surrender to the federal forces. But before he does, he sits down and he has a letter written. Remember I said that, the passive voice, a letter written for him. He didn't have the fancy English, so he let his clerks write the letter. But in this letter, he's telling his son advice for the future. And I think it's fascinating that Forrest, that James McPherson, the great author, will say is the killing machine, and sort of dismisses him that way, is showing a different side to himself. He's telling his son what might happen. I might be killed, or I might have to go into exile. Something bad might happen, and you have to continue on. And if you're going to continue on, the example you should follow is to be more like your mother. So here's Forrest, the war machine, basically telling his son, don't be like me, be like your mother. And he says, I've made a lot of mistakes. Don't make my mistakes. Shun bad company. I don't think he knew what shun meant. But he probably told the staff, tell the boy not to get in trouble. and they put it in that nice fancy language. But he would always make them read it to him. And if it doesn't have the right pitch, we'll give it a new tune. We'll change the wording to be what I want. He knew what the words could say once he got them in context, and these guys could help explain anything that he couldn't understand. So at some point, he's going to have this letter forwarded to his son William, and the advice is to what to do once the war is over, and he has to go on in case his father has been killed or has to have been gone off to exile. He will surrender to Edward R.S. Canby at Gainesville, Alabama, and he will say a lot of interesting things to a lot of folks, including he will say at one point, any person who wants to further prosecute this war is a fit candidate for a lunatic asylum and ought to go there immediately. And again, you think, well, wait a minute, Forrest is going to go to the hills and keep fighting. That's all he knows is fighting and killing. That's what Sherman thought. That's what Grant thought. But Forrest was practical. I love that. It was Dan who said, he's practical. He was practical. He's fought. He's done everything he could. In fact, once he's on his way home, he will tell the groups of people that come to see him on the train when he stops, I did everything I could to break up this union, but having failed, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm going home. And he will tell his people, they'll say, well, why don't you keep fighting? He says, boys, I don't know about you, but I'm going home. And going home is what he planned to do. And in fact, if you look at his farewell address, it's longer and more eloquent than Robert E. Lee at Appomattox. It's fascinating how much Forrest was able to articulate, again through the words of somebody else, but the meaning of himself, what probably needed to be said. I never asked you to go anywhere I was not willing to go myself. You have fought the war and fought well and hard. But having ended it, you should go home and go on with your lives. And the government to which we have surrendered will be magnanimous. I'm sure he wouldn't have been able to spell magnanimous, but he knew that meant they'll get along. They'll let you go. They'll let you get on with your life. And that's what he expected to do. And that's what I'm going to let you do now. I'm going to let you go home to your life. There it is. So that's a little taste of Nathan Bedford Forrest. I just thought it might be fun to sort of see him in a different light. You may have many questions. This, of course, is a book that's been reprinted from the original that Dan has all of his notes in. I also have sheets with all of my other books if you want to take a sheet home and maybe get some books for Christmas or you want to do something else. I can mail those to you. But I wanted to stop and say thank you again for having me. I also wanted to see if there are any questions. Let me throw open to questions. Anything that's come to your mind?